because we were just kind of starting some shading, I think that I want to take a half a second to see if we can't improve on some of our shading. If you look at this like great drawing by Sergio Topi that I planted, that's the drawing with a bear. And that's a wonderful example of really, really, really clean shading that you see the big flat mass and then the area is left white. You see him using marks for texture. Just below it, the guy holding the gun, we're looking up at the guy holding the gun with this stone structure. So this has been divided into dark and light, and the halftone has been left out of it. And you see the power of the flat black shapes. And the halftone is where you would do, now if you go below it to Hellboy, you see like there's almost no halftone, but like just at the edge of his hair when it goes up into the shape of his skull, or you see the cylinders of the eye of his mask, and those cylinders have a little bit of halftone, or in his cheek there's just a little bit of halftone just above his jaw. Okay, and then the final one with the man with the two guns, there's no halftone. It goes from shadow to light. It has a really strong graphic impact. Okay, so it's like making shadow shapes, filling in shadow shapes, leaving everything in the light stark and light. It's a style. It's been used in, say, Dark Knight. It's been used in a lot of different things. Let's work from the Hellboy drawing, and I want to just give a quick example of how this works. And so I'd like for you to kind of draw along with this. So that's the shape of the skull, and off the shape of the skull, I'm going to add the shape of the jaw. Okay, so it's a circle, and then off the circle, I add essentially a square. Like we can really simplify it into, here's a square. So the circle into a square. Okay, and then the neck. So the first thing that I'm going to do here is I've got this shape, I've got this image analyzed as shape, right? Fairly easy, really straightforward, fairly easy. And now I want to go through and start to deal with this image as volume. So in order to deal with it as volume, one of the things that I want to do is I'm going to look for the sagittal line, which is like right down the center plane. And you can see that it's just a little bit in from the edge. Like he's not entirely in profile, but he is largely in profile. Okay, so so the center line will pass over the middle and end here, and it would go behind the form over there, but I'm not going to put it in because it's behind the form. Okay, so now where would the coronal plane be? The coronal plane coming up the ears and over the top of the head. And it would be, notice how the coronal plane is going in that direction, right? Whereas if he were turned a little bit more in profile, the coronal plane would be just kind of a straight line, or it could even be turned backwards. Okay, so then when we get to his neck, I'm going to run the coronal plane there, and I'm going to look for some transverse planes, and I want to take this line out because it's going to confuse me now. Okay, so here's a transverse plane, and I'm going to run the transverse plane. That's like a level line going around, and his mouth will end up being essentially a transverse plane. His eyes will end up being essentially a transverse plane. The underside of the eyes of the underside of that, the chin across the bottom, these would all be transverse planes, okay? Now, the construction so we have in here, there's an eye socket, and we're seeing the edge of the eye socket and the top of, here's the zygomatic arch right here. There's kind of this bone that sits right there. Okay, so what's happening is his hairline comes down like this. It gets to the bone. We see the shadow moving across the bone and over and up into the eye socket and moving over this way. Okay, this, his hair, notice how the top of his hair is a transverse plane. And then he has this cool little ponytail. Okay. So I'm not going to take this drawing super far. I'm wanting to use it as an example of shading technique, and I didn't get the perspective exactly correct. So you'll see how my perspective, in order to draw these things, we need a cylinder and a cylinder, and so here I have to draw a cylinder here, and I'm going to draw a cylinder here. Okay. And here's another thing that's going on, is that his jaw is lots bigger. His jaw comes over to here because he's an exaggerated character. Okay, he's a cartoon character. Okay, now let's look at the shading. So this area in here wants to go directly to black. And this area in here wants to go all the way to black too. Now you see that the nose, inside the nose, from here you'll see that the nose pops out into light, but the mass of the shadow, okay. And everything that's going to happen in here is going to go directly into black until it comes out to the lower part of his jaw. Okay, but then the black comes up here like this, and then it runs across. Okay, so what's important to me that you're starting to notice is that you're starting to see the structure of a graphically shaded drawing. Like, so what I've done is I've laid out my structure, like the way that we were just practicing in the last lesson. And now I'm laying out my shadow, my black areas, like the areas, I'm laying out the areas of massed in tone, okay, as opposed to volume. So this inside of there is black. But in this case, the masked in tone is reinforcing my volume. Okay, all of that would go totally to black, okay? And it's that plane, it's that side plane. So the lips are on the side plane. The jaw is on the side plane. And this is Hellboy is a Mike Magnolia character, and you're gonna see that, like, in this area here, so if you're following this and you just black this all in here, and then you get to the jaw, like now, right here on this edge, the time that you spend constructing a beautiful edge there, like I'm not going to do it because I want to be respecting of your time, but the time that you spend constructing a beautiful edge out there, it just shows like this, it shows this amazing texture. So here, this edge is in blackness right here. And so we start to end up with a wonderfully graphically constructed image, right? However, it's not entirely satisfying. It doesn't feel done. But this is a phase that I want for you guys to be consistently passing through, okay? Now the next phase that we'll start to think about, look, I'm going to clean out the lights, especially cleaning out the lights. It does almost the same thing as, like, so all my sketchy lines and stuff like that, I'm going to leave in the midtones. Not always, but for now I'm going to leave them in the midtones. And then what you start doing is you say, like, okay, I want a small halftone. Like, I want the form is softer than what I'm saying in a few places. Like, it's like right coming over this cheekbone. The cheekbone is a circle, really. And so I want to show that with these cross hatches that bring me around. This cylinder it's a cylinder, and so I'm going to cross hatch over to the light, and here's my shadow. Here's my shadow. So this is a phase where now, so all of this would be black right there, and I think that it would be, and now I've changed the perspective on the head and all of this a little bit. And so what I would do is I would make this black in here as well. I'm going to leave that little area in there as a reflected light, even though it wouldn't necessarily work. I'm just choosing to do it because I think it looks cool. So there's my halftone. There's the darkness. Okay. And you're not seeing, because I drew it with gray, but check this out. If I go like this, you can get the graphic impact of it. Oopies. So that would be, if I just darkened a little bit more, if I took what I just did and just darkened a little bit more. And then he has a beautifully shaped contour. I just left that circle, but the shape of a skull is really flattened across here. And then you can go through and even study his line work, how he overlaps in an area like this. And in this one, I'm quite certain if he had done this perspective, he would make a halftone right here, because that just is the shape of the forehead turning up into the halftone there is nice. Okay, so have a go at this piece in terms of a shading lesson. I think that it's a classic example of good shading.